What's going on, everybody? I'm sure right from the get-go, you guys are going to be confused, especially if you're watching this later on YouTube, because usually it's just me, and you've looked and you've been like, Steve Colle is the guest, and that's not Steve Colle. This is my boy, Doug Brown. Doug, can you say hi to everybody?
Hey everybody, what's going on?
Super. Oh,
the ice machine. Sorry.
we got some stuff going on. Oh, okay. That's funny. Okay, cool. So you've got something special happening right now, and I wanted to bring you on to show it off. Do you want to show that off?
Well, yeah, actually, we got two things special. Kind of like, first one is you can catch Chuck and I slinging our books at Big Texas Comic Con in San Antonio this weekend, October 8, 9, and 10. Yeah. Look for us in Artist Alley. We, oddly enough, still don't have the table number yet, which is crazy. But just look for the awesomeness, and you'll find us. You know. And the second one is I have a costume contest that I run every year for my book, Stormy, Singer Songwriter Badass. And yeah, we can show an image of what's going on. This is the lead character, Stormy Strong. She's a pop star who needs to fight for her soul and sanity against the forces of darkness. And I've been doing this for, I think, the last 3 or 4 years. And, you know, every year I try to up the prize money a little bit. And hopefully, you know, if things go well at Big Texas, I might be able to throw a little bit more cash into this thing. So, you know, it's pretty simple. You dress up, try to emulate Stormy or one of the other characters in the book. Put your tag your pick with a Stormy comic or the hashtag and submit it on your feed. I'll eventually find it in Instagram and add it to my feed and stories. And then from there, we'll just let the entries pile up, and we'll pick a winner on Halloween, basically. And just to show you a little bit about the characters, this is, like I said, the lead. And in my Instagram, Stormy Comic, you'll see this post, and it has kind of a breakdown of the characters, you know, what they generally kind of wear. So you don't have to go totally crazy and do the dress and the boots and all that stuff. You can just kind of get the spirit of the character, and we'll be good, you know. And another character that is pretty intense is Crystal Presley. This is basically the villain of the story, and yeah, she'll, I think, be a lot of fun to try to dress up as. And that's pretty much it, really. Yeah, if you want more rules and information, just go to Stormy Comic on Instagram, and you can look up this post and check it out. Yeah, so you can, I guess, take it away from there, Chuck.
No, dude, I'm so excited. So yeah, we've got that going on. We've got Big Texas, and then you and I are going to be quiet for about a month and a half. And I know people aren't used to me being quiet, but we're going to be quiet for about a month and a half. And then we've got Emerald City Comic Con coming up.
Yes.
And that's going to be pretty cool. You and I are going to be making the drive all the way to Seattle.
Yep, 33 hours.
So you can always see us there. 33, I know, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's perfect.
We're end up
for those
at
of
Salt Lake City or maybe Moab. Like, hopefully, you know, we're just going to just haul ass. You know, probably settled in about 10 or 12 o'clock midnight to try to crash, get a little bit of sleep, and then, you know, get back at it.
And dude, it's going to be so fun. I'm very excited. So, Doug, thank you so much for coming out, man. I really appreciate you showing up. And I'll see you this weekend.
See you, everybody.
See you, bud.
Okay.
All right. Now you're just stuck with me for a minute. Guys, come on out, share. Brian Manell is here. Yo, 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 what's going on? I do want to prepare you guys real quick, just so you're all aware. I did get a thing from StreamYard, and they said that they might have partial blackouts or whatnot. So I'm just letting everyone know. Brian said bye to Doug. Phil Leon's in the house. What's going on? I'm doing good. How are you? How's the van? The van is still kicking, my friend. How are you? Cool. We got people coming in. Everything's going on. I am so excited about today's guest. He is my personal mentor. I absolutely just adore this dude. He is so fucking smart, and he has taught me so much about editing and even just creating comics and whatnot. And looking at it in a different way, because of course I was you're very welcome, Doug. You're very welcome. I was looking at it from a bottom down sort of thing. I was able to kind of look at comics and see it from the entry indie point of view, and of course he has seen it from all sorts of angles and has worked with people who've seen it from all sorts of angles. So tonight's going to be super amazing. Steve Colle is in the house. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight on to the opener, and just we're going to make this happen, and we're going to have a blast. So thank you guys so much, and let's do this.
Canadian bacon is actually really good, and it's nothing like normal bacon, and it's better than ham, which you guys seem to call Canadian bacon. I'm very good at writing. I write very well. Yeah, it's Shop Talk.
Do some of your audience members like the word fuck? Cool. Then I'm going to keep saying fuck because I care.
How you doing?
You know, you told me that I would appreciate that as a Canadian, the entry, and damn, that was funny. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. No, dude, my friend Eric Cockrell, my partner on Essence House, he was like, man, you need an opener. I was like, okay, I'm not against that at all. And so he made that right away and got that going. And I think that was there by my first or second show. So that was pretty great. So yeah, just solid dude. We got a bunch of people here today. James Simon is in the house. Thank you, buddy. This is the other Canadian Tarantino editor. This is Steve Colle. I'm so glad to have you in. My first memory of you, it's funny. When I got into the indie comic sphere, I got in from the very, very bottom. And when I was on Facebook, there was almost no one else openly identifying themselves as an editor. And so I basically spent like the first year feeling like I was the only editor out there. And even when a couple people showed up, I still kind of felt like I was sort of at the top of, well, nothing. There was no heap or anything. I was on top of an anthill, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm the king of this castle. And then you came in, you were like, I'm trying to get editors together, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? And then you showed me who you were, and I was like, oh, shit. Oh, okay. No, this is the real thing. Okay, cool. And so since then, I've been able to ask questions of people like Tom Brevoort, Mark Wade, like your group, Comic Book Editors Alliance, is stacked with some amazing people who give just the most brilliant fucking insight. Like, I mean, seriously, guys, if you get the chance, you don't have to be an editor, but if you're interested in editing, learning more about it, all that side of comics, you need to go there, because this really is like, there's so many heavyweights there weighing in, showing off their thoughts, all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you. That was my first memory of you.
Actually, even, I don't know if it was before that, because we're actually coming up on 3 years at the beginning of November for the Comic Book Editors Alliance. But I remember contacting you directly via Messenger and offering to give you some tips.
And that was before the Editors Alliance. Yeah, so that was more than 3 years ago. And yes, and that was, I remember that. And I remember that was shortly after, like, we had met, and I learned, oh, okay, this guy's the real thing. And you took me, it was like my brain exploded, because there was just so much to learn. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And it wasn't like, it wasn't too much, but it was just suddenly realizing, oh shit, there is an awful, like, there's just so much to it being an editor, and it was amazing.
You know, I find that those people who are not editors can still learn as readers what happens behind the scenes, and they appreciate what they see on the page a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian Manel comes in. He says, "Hi, Steve. Not sure if you remember me reaching out for an editing gig, but good to see you. Hope you're doing well."
Doing great, thanks.
I mean, how many? I mean, Brian Manel is actually a regular on the show. He's amazing. And Brian, if you have any editing or writing questions, anything along the spectrum, feel free to ask. And that was the thing that you opened me up to. Actually, is that because when I came in, I was like, "Oh, I'm an editor. I do it all. I proof, I help with their outline, and I go over story and whatnot." And you were like, "Oh yeah? Do you do art direction? Do you do lettering direction? Do you do voice work?" And you went over all this shit, and I was like, "No, let's hear what that shit is." So
yeah,
for those people, like, obviously what we do is a huge plethora of things. Can you give us a quick overview? You don't have to explain them all, but just like kind of a quick list of the sort of services that a comic book editor can offer.
Well, let me start by saying that artist and writer and letterer are roles that are very easy to define. Editor is one of those roles that is definitely not easy to define. It encompasses so much and also so little at the same time if you break it down. For example, you know, there's proofreading, there's copy editing, where you're going through the text that's in the balloons, the captions, the sound effects. There's, you know, structural editing, developmental editing. There's, you know, even concept editing at the very beginning before, you know, the script is even created. And then there's art direction. You know, a lot of people who are great with the writing aspect of it don't really understand the art. So they don't know how to look for the flow in the art. They don't know how to identify, you know, props and things that are kind of hidden that should be a lot more obvious. For example, one of the books that I'm editing today, that I just was editing today, one of the things that I noticed is that some of the focus panels were so small that you couldn't really, they weren't a focus. You know, they were important information, and yet the panel was not large enough. The details weren't large enough to really present them as such. It's kind of like having the ultimate clue to what the solution is going to be, but it's that small, you know?
So you still need your Sherlock Holmes magnifying glass in order to find it.
Oh yeah. But you know, on top of all the quality control and creative aspects, there's also the project management. You know, there's making sure books come out on schedule, creative teams, putting creative teams together sometimes. That's one of the things that I do, but not everybody who's an editor knows how to identify what style of art will go nicely with what style of colors, or, you know, even the lettering. Letterers don't always understand how the font and the font size play to the art. Editors don't understand that either. So there are editors who specialize in the field in certain parts, for example, proofreading or copy editing or developmental editing. But for the most part, there's very few that encompass the entire thing. And for myself, I've been doing this for over 30 years, so it's skills that I developed over time. Not everybody is comfortable in those areas. And I will say that there are some fantastic editors who are terrible at spelling, and that seems to be the stereotype, you know, of what an editor does is correct spelling. Well, there's a lot of editors who are terrible at spelling and grammar.
Yep. It's funny. One of my favorite things that you did for me was you had a lettering seminar.
Yep.
And you went over that, and I was like, well, whatever, I should probably learn this. I had so much fucking fun, and I was blown away by how much I've used this lettering seminar. And I'm now like dogged with how I'll come after people when it comes to lettering. I'm like, no. That's not gonna happen for us. You know what I mean? Like, even like in the art, I'll look now at the art and I'll go, hey, this guy's talking first. Why is he on the right side of the panel? I'm like, well, he just is. No. You have to switch that around. You got to think about the lettering when that happens, and that's all because of your course being able to kind of step back and you need to be able to see, especially like when you're there for the whole project and you're kind of editing all aspects of it. You need to be able to look 5-6 pieces ahead and go stuff that's happening. And so we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah. You know, oddly enough, I find that the artists, or the creators, I should say, who put the first speaker on the right instead of the left tend to be the ones who are creating the entire project, or who are the writer and artist at the same time. It's like they draw out the art, but they don't plan out who's going to be speaking first. So it's almost like doing the Marvel method where they draw it out, but there's no pre-planning as to who's going to speak first.
Yeah. And yeah, that whole thing is funny. Sorry, Brian Manell threw something up. He said, I fucking love editors, LOL. Really appreciate the work they do. Thank you. I think you might be in the minority there, Brian, but we really appreciate you.
You know, more and more people, more and more creators, I would say, are learning what editors do, or have a curiosity of what editors do. And I've had a lot of people contact me directly and in the group, in the editors group, you know, saying that they're interested in hiring an editor, but they've never ever worked with an editor before. And so taking that step, it's escaping their comfort zones in one way, and also a desire to learn at the same time. So kudos to everybody who, you know, takes that leap to try and find out what an editor will actually do for them.
Yeah. I find the thing that helps me the most when I'm talking to a client is one of the first things I'll say to them now is, especially the ones who say, I've never had an editor before, you know, can you help me? Like, what does this mean? I'll say, okay, well, first off, everything I'm doing here is suggestions. They're educated suggestions. And so they're coming from a point, and you paid for these suggestions. So you can ignore all of them, but it seems pretty stupid to pay to ignore someone. So, you know, I would certainly listen. And then if you do feel like I'm wrong or you disagree, don't tell me, no, you're wrong. Try to come up with the reason why. And if you can't come up with a good reason why I'm wrong, then we maybe need to sit on that one for a little bit and figure it out. It doesn't mean that I am right or that I am wrong, or you know, same for you. What it means is, okay, we're not in agreement here, and we need to look at this thing a little bit closer and really understand what the issue is and the right way to attack it. So it doesn't become about right or wrong. It's not, I don't give a shit. Like, and I think for most editors, it's not an ego thing where we need you to listen to us. It's about the book. We need the book to be the best as possible. What's best for the book? And sometimes us being wrong is best for the book.
Yeah. There's a clear distinction, though, between what we do as freelance editors and what corporate or house editors do. Yeah. For example, as you were saying, it's mostly suggestions on our part, and sometimes we suggest very, very aggressively. You know, especially if we have a point to make. You know, this is wrong and this is wrong because of this. you know. But working in a publishing company, you know, for example, DC, Marvel, or Dark Horse, it isn't a matter of suggestions. It's you get this done this way, otherwise we're not going to follow through on it, you know. And so it's Lee Nordling, who's been in the industry for a number of decades, I think 30, 40 years now. He makes it very clear by saying it depends on who's your boss, the head or the tail, and the head or the tail of the dog, you know. And so the head of the dog is corporate, the tail is creative, you know. And so if the creator is the one who's in charge, then, you know, you make your suggestions and they can say yes or no. But if you're working as a house editor, if the house editor says this needs to change, they will make sure that it changes. If it isn't you making the change, they'll get somebody else to make the change. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, or tails.
That makes perfect sense. I like how you put that too. Have you ever had one of those moments where, especially, you know, when working with the tail, when working directly for the creator, where you basically had to say, hey, look, I know that most of these things are suggestions, but this thing right here, this is kind of the hill I'm going to die on. Like, if we can't do this, then this book doesn't work. Like, have you ever had kind of come to Jesus moments like that?
Almost every single project has had something like that. Yes. And but you know, there's a matter of trust that is built between an editor and a client and a creator, you know. And the people that I work with know that I have their best interest and the best interest of their book in mind, you know. And so when I make a suggestion, it's not haphazard. It's not me trying to be controlling or ego trip or anything like that. It is, this will help the book for the reader. And, you know, if it's a piece of dialogue, something as simple as a piece of dialogue, some creators get so stuck on that piece of dialogue, married to it even. And I try to explain to them, this dialogue is not working because of this. And sometimes it's the way it's phrased, sometimes it's not serving a particular purpose, and sometimes it's not that particular character's voice, you know. So we brainstorm together to try and come up with ways to correct it. But flat out and out, very rarely do I have a client telling me that, you know, you made the suggestion, but I'm not going to use it. I made the decision, I'm not going to use it. Which is completely fine because it's their project. It's not mine, you know. Yeah. It's a playground that I'm invited into, and I'm trying to you know, make it look and accessible to everybody possible. And once I leave the sandbox, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Phil Leon says being an editor is like wrangling feral cats. And I think that's a pretty fair statement. Would you say that how important, would you say bedside manner is as an editor?
So there was an editor on digital webbing. Hi, Heather. So there was an editor on digital webbing who we were having a talk about. It was a general talk about editors in general, comic book editors in general. And so this editor came on and asked, what if your editor treats you like shit, but he's doing it with the best intentions in mind? And the person who responded to him said, why the hell would we want to hire somebody like that? You know? And So bedside manner, is so important because it's a communication, it's a building of trust. This is their baby, and we're just the nannies. I wouldn't consider myself a nanny per se, but maybe a Danny, not a nanny. But we're in there to help them take care of their baby, and so ultimately everything is a matter of the trust, the communication, and making them feel comfortable is so important. Because if they don't feel comfortable with what I'm doing as an editor, then I need to make sure that they do get comfortable. And I have had a couple of relationships with creators where we've decided to part company. And sometimes it's because personalities just do not mix, and sometimes the communication just isn't there. I had one client, for example, who, no matter how I phrased things, it always came out sounding wrong to them or attacking. And that was not the intention whatsoever. And I came at it in so many different directions. And finally, I just said, I don't think that the communication is working, and I'm going to step away. However, my advantage is that I have a list of editors that I can refer these clients to. And so over the past few years, getting to know more and more editors, I've referred a lot more people to other editors. And sometimes it's because of the project, if it's something that I don't feel comfortable editing or not confident in editing, I'll refer them to somebody else.
So let's go to the people first. Phil said you got to be diplomatic about it, for sure.
Yeah.
John Westhoff said maybe I'm a therapist, so maybe I could cross over into editing.
Actually, that is so funny because, and it's exactly that. There was a book published by Buddy Scalera called I can't even remember the name of the book right now.
Who we had on the show actually earlier on.
Creating comics from start to finish. And so in the first chapter is an interview with Mike Martz, who's a former Marvel DC editor who's now editor-in-chief at Aftershock Comics. And he gives a list of different roles that an editor fulfills. And counselor, I believe, is one of them. But I know for myself, when I was in college, I was actually studying to be a social worker. And so a lot of the skills that I learned there, even though I didn't follow through on that, I actually applied to editing. And so really listening and ensuring that the person feels like they're being heard are so important.
You were speaking in one of your posts about being empathic. And I think that's something that we really, as editors, really need to try to have that tool in your back pocket of being empathetic and understanding this is their kid. You are calling their child ugly. And you need to, we need to find a way to say that, but also find a way to ease them into, don't worry, we can fix this together. And then, so, yeah, that was, I remember you mentioning that, and that was really big for me. Kira says bedside manner is very important as all writers are dying. Inside, yeah. Well, so what do you look for in a writer to help themselves?
What do I look for in a writer to help you help themselves? One of the very first things I would say is passion, because I want them to realize that they're doing this for a reason. They're writing for a reason. It isn't because they're trying to pass the time. It isn't because they just feel like it. They have an intention They have an intention to writing and creating. So making them remember that there's a passion to why they're writing is, I think, first and foremost. It's so easy to get discouraged and sidetracked. And so definitely that's what I try and focus on.
Sorry, I'm glad you answered that, because at the same time, my kiddo came in. She's like, Dad, this is very important. Started talking to me. I'm like, okay, go quick, please, please. I'm trying to listen while also listen to you. So thank you for whatever answer you just gave. I'm sure it was insightful and brilliant. It's a live show, folks.
I was just saying that, ultimately it's a matter of bringing it back to why the person is creating in the first place, and in a case with writers, most of the time they're doing it from a passion. They're not doing it for a paycheck.
Yeah. If they were doing it for a paycheck, it certainly wouldn't be comics.
Yeah.
So Brian, I was actually gonna bring this up. So I'm really glad that you did, because now this gets to be a comment and a viewer question rather than just me trying to find it. So, do certain genres require a different kind of care within script editing, or is it the same approach throughout? I know the answer, but I love your answer.
I would say that as an editor, it's all the same as it applies to how an editor would go about viewing and dissecting the issues and stuff. When it comes to genre, there are certain editors that are better at specific genres than others. Put me into editing romance, probably not a good idea. But likewise, it also comes down to a particular style, and I have certain things that I'm not comfortable with, like super hyper violence, like preacher type of violence. Is not something that I particularly like. But then again, I don't necessarily like that kind of stuff in film and television either. But the general approach as an editor to when it comes to a script of a particular genre, one or the other, is pretty much the same regardless. It just comes from your editor's understanding of that genre. Okay, so for example, if an editor doesn't understand fantasy, therefore they won't understand character names, they won't understand places, they won't understand mythology. There's certain mythologies, and so an editor like that needs to be able to work their magic on that particular genre. And it's the same thing with a crime noir story. You have to have a certain understanding of that material in order to actually approach it. And not all editors are able to tackle certain genres like that.
I love that you mentioned those two things, because first off, I ended up taking a romance writer's course to better understand romance writing, because the tropes, the ideas behind it, it really is. And I mean, the thing is that it's so easy for people who don't read romance to kind of fluff it off and be like, it doesn't matter. But in novels, and in a lot of, maybe not in comics so much, but in novels, it is the by far biggest top selling genre of any other genre in novels. So if you don't have that respect for the genre, just don't try to edit it, or don't try to work in it, because people will know that you don't get it. Like, real romance readers will be able to pick you out right away. And then it's funny that you mentioned fantasy, because I am a huge fantasy guy. And I remember reviewing a book, and someone brought me their fantasy book, and they're like, I'm so proud of this, blah, blah, can you please review it? And I went over it, and I wasn't mean, but I said to them, I don't mean to be rude, but as someone whose primary focus has been fantasy for most of their lives, this feels like someone just decided, I want to write a fantasy. And, calling your badass whatever The Order is like, that's the first number one. No, it needs to have a fantastical name. They're all called The Order. the order of what? Or, you know, like give it something else. There was way too many generic things, and I was like, no, like trust me, fantasy people as one, we're seeing right through you, and we know that you don't get that. And that's where someone who knows that genre might be able to step up and go, hey, we need a fancy word here. We need something special, you know, and maybe give them some ideas or help them along, show them some things to possibly read or check out. I know that you're very big as an editor. You're very big on homework. You'll often, correct me if I'm wrong, you'll give homework and say, hey, man, maybe you need to check this out or that out. I mean, hell, even just teaching me, I got a fair amount of homework. And even just, I love it. Like the biggest part, my favorite part, I don't do it often enough, but one of my favorite parts of being a part of the Comic Book Editors Alliance is there's homework a lot. You'll just be like, hey, we're doing this. What do you see wrong with this? What do you see right? I just want your fresh comments. So yeah.
You know, I find that I'm a teacher first and an editor second. And so when I'm editing, for example, especially a first issue, everything that I work with the creator on is ensuring that they know how to structure their story so that their next story will be easier, and the story after that will be easier still. So I teach them everything that I possibly can in that first issue. Yes, it takes a little longer, you know, but they go at their next issue with a lot more knowledge and can approach it a lot easier. You know, I tell my clients and my students, once you get to know your characters, they almost write themselves. And I had one client who literally took that to heart, and the characters took it away, you know. And unfortunately, they didn't know when to stop, and the characters just told the story, and what went from 4 or 5 issue miniseries went into 7, you know. But at least they got that the characters were speaking for themselves and you know, telling the writer, this is what you should do next, you know, with me and such and so on.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I often have to remind people the outline is there to help you, but it is not set in stone at any point. And that's why I so often hate Bibles. When they'll have the I understand the importance of the writer's Bible and whatnot, but the problem is that I find all too often they will take that is what has happened, that is stone, and I'm like, nah, man, if you know, like, you haven't written anything yet. It's not like nothing is published, and I'll tell people nothing is canon until you've published it. So if at some point we realize, no, this character's background is different, or it's you know, it should be different, this thing that you made up doesn't make sense, cool, well, we can still change it. Your Bible doesn't mean anything because no one's read it but you and possibly me as the editor.
Yeah. I find that some writers look at their Bible, their character Bible, as a technical manual that is, you know, this is the only way it can be done.
Yeah.
And really, creating comics, the creative aspect of it is entirely like life. You have to let it be organic, okay? Yes, there are certain things that you have to pre-establish, but there are going to be turning points that you come up with on the fly that, you know, what if I were to do this with the character because I just put them into this particular situation, and, you know, what could possibly happen from that? And it can result in a change in the story that you're working on, or expanding upon it, or giving you an opportunity to tell another story featuring that particular aspect. But the ideas have to be able to be realized when they happen. And by being too strict to your character Bible, to your outline, you're not allowing those moments of brainstorming to come to fruition.
It was funny. I had a client who I was commenting on their Bible because we were working on something, and they said, and I explained, you know what, this really needs to change. I don't think this makes sense, blah, blah, blah. And they said, look, it's called a Bible because it's the word of God. And I am God here. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, here's my point of view on this subject. It's called a Bible because there's many translations and not everybody sees it the same way. So my suggestion is maybe look at it a little differently because you ain't God.
And ultimately, if one writer can be dealing with the same artist, the same colorist, the same editor, consistently through every single project, and they develop that understanding. But when there's a change in any of those collaborative roles, you're very, it's like believing in UFOs or not kind of thing. You know, the fact that people don't believe that life is out there, it's the same thing with having that Bible and believing that an editor, colorist, or artist won't have their own thought on how that can change. You know,
that's so true. Kira Burton's excited. My fellow social worker dropout. John Westhoff says, "Oh,
I just want to say that I actually was in the career program for that, and then I found out once I graduated that there was no jobs. This was back in Montreal, and so all that time I was in school, I found out after the fact that there were no jobs. They were all in BC, and I was in Montreal, so I didn't end up doing anything with it, except putting it towards editing."
Right. And for those of you out there who don't know Canada all that well, that would be like being in New Hampshire and then finding out, oh, well, you could do that if you were in Seattle.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely not in Seattle. So John Westhoff wants to know, maybe we can bill insurance for editing now? Perhaps. Kira, you're building a fan. Kira's very excited. She loves you.
Okay, I will tell you right now, I'm celebrating 18 years of marriage on Monday.
Good man. That's very smart, because we never know when the wives watch these things. Good call. What do we? Oh, Sarah's in the house. So good to see you, hon. Glad to see you, and I hope everything's going good. What else do we have? Okay, cool. So how do you approach the art end of things? It's like there's different sets of editing between copy and art.
You know, the very first thing that I tell artists is to only draw the layouts first, loose pencils first. The reason being that as soon as you get into those final pencils, it is so hard to change them. I don't know many artists who enjoy redoing work, and I can't blame them, you know. But if you do all of the art in layouts first, then that's, as an editor, that's where I can correct things. That's where I can tell you that this figure should be here, or the flow of the page should read this way instead of this way. In the Editors Alliance group, there was one page from a 1970s issue of Conan the Barbarian, where the artist, and I think it was actually John Buscema, who had designed the page in such a way that it required arrows in order to read it. And that is a complete, that is not doing it properly. Okay, you have to have that clarity without the turning signals. Okay, and I mean, this isn't the city street. It's supposed to be fluid, like going down a river, you know. And I tell people all the time, you want to make sure that your story doesn't have speed bumps, roadblocks, or dead ends, because as soon as you create those or allow those to exist in your story, that's where you lose the attention of your reader, and they get taken out of the story. But with the layouts as an editor, that's where we try and correct everything so that as it goes to the next stage of pencils, we can make sure that it'll be smoother sailing.
Yeah. One of the things that, and I already kind of understood the basics of this, but you were very good at kind of hammering the point home, and that was, we read from left to right, up to down. So we need to kind of be able to do that Z sort of deal. So we're able to kind of look, and a lot of that has to do, the art is certainly there, but the lettering helps a lot with that too. That's a huge.
I will say that one of the most common page designs is a 9-panel grid. And with a 9-panel grid, we're taught read across, down, back over to the left, read across, down, back over to the left, read across. However, the 9-panel grid can be used in so many different ways that there was actually a Moon Knight page that had Moon Knight going around the periphery of all the panels, and the villain was in the middle, and he was circling them. So going with the Z formation, even though we try and make it as simple as possible, more often than not, the Z formation is not clear. For example, if we're starting with a tall panel on the left-hand side, and then we're going up and doing 4 panels, 2 side by side, drop down 2 side by side. So that first panel is going to be that tall panel on the left side. Okay, we don't automatically go to the top panel number 2 and 3, and then 4 and 5, completely forgetting about that tall panel. But because that tall panel encompasses so much, if I were to put a character whose head is at the top, whose pointed hand is in the middle where panels 3 and 4 and 5 would be, my eye is more likely to go to the pointed hand and go straight to panels 4 and 5 instead of 2 and 3 next. So we have to be careful with the art and layout of the page, and making sure that the visual cues, the arrows, the natural arrows in the storytelling are very clear as to where to go next. As an editor, that's something that we do.
Well, and that I'm seeing that, I don't know how long that's been going on, but that's something that I'm seeing a lot of artists. They love kind of doing the overlapping, kind of breaking the walls, so to speak. And I get that, it's fun, but you need to, as an editor and as an artist, you need to understand sort of the story you're telling and where you're pointing the eye, because that's huge.
Yeah, when it comes to comics and art, there's a lot of carryover from photography, from fine art, and from film. Okay, for example, a 2-shot or a 3-shot is 2 characters in the panel or 3 characters in the panel. But when you're talking about a 3-shot, you're talking about positioning the characters in such a way that one is on the left, one is on the right, one is in the middle. Okay, it's the same thing with photography. We talk a lot about composition. Okay, and so with composition, you're looking for what they call leading lines. Okay, which means that lines that are naturally in the photograph, like a fence or a fence post. There was a comic that I use quite often in teaching where there's a train track, and so the train track leads the eye, but it leads it down to what should be the focus of the picture, okay, which is a character or a prop or something. So the line is leading down there. The same thing with patterns and stuff. So understanding or learning composition in photography and cinematography really helps in understanding how to create comics.
Yeah. So Paul Gomez, thank you for coming on the show. I don't think we've had you on here before. This is a great question, though. What are the best questions to ask when looking for the correct editor? Great question.
So the very first thing that I'm going to say is that a lot of creators don't know what they need when looking for an editor. Okay, I have had clients approach me saying that they just need a proofreader, just need someone to, help out with the dialogue. And I come in and I look at their samples, and I see a lot of different things with the art, or I notice that structurally the story doesn't necessarily flow. Quite often in a story that I'm working on, this page that's over here on page 4 should actually be page 1,
Yeah.
and we move things around a lot. But a lot of creators don't know what they need. So when they're looking for an editor, they don't know what they're looking for in an editor. And so finding an editor is part finding out for yourself what you need first. Okay. And for example, in the Comic Book Editors Alliance, I allow creators to come in and to post their needs for an editor. And usually one of the very first things that I say is, can you be more specific? What exactly are you looking for? And I'll actually pull them aside in private messages and try and walk them through to see what it is exactly that they're trying to establish. Okay. And sometimes it's very, very simple. They're just looking for someone to do a fine tuning. But other times that fine tuning isn't what they actually need. And I need to make sure that they understand that there's a lot more work to do than just this base amount. So first and foremost, it's a matter of stepping back and trying to assess. And then if you can't assess yourselves, then ask somebody who is a professional like myself, or even going into the Editors Alliance group and asking, what actually do I need for this particular project? And quite a few editors will are more than willing to take a look and give you some feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Paul, great question. That was a fantastic question.
Definitely.
Sarah came in. She said, I love reading and reviewing for creators and building a page starting with the basic nuts and bolts all the way to a polished result. I think that learning this stuff about editing and whatnot, and understanding, how the eye moves and all that kind of stuff, that will explain to you why you might find a page off-putting. Like, you might see a certain page and go, I don't know what's wrong with this, but it feels wrong. And so, like, learning these rules, learning that kind of stuff, that can kind of explain to you why you're seeing these things, and why because it's not always enough to be able to review something necessarily and say, hey, I liked it, but there was something off about it. But then being able to say, I liked it, but the layouts kind of made things a little confusing and blah, blah, blah. And being able to kind of articulate it a little better can help. So certainly come on out to the group and learn whatever you want, because I think that'll help a lot with your reviewing.
Yeah. I find that when it comes to there are different skills involved in editing. And the very base one is assessment. And so, for example, a submissions editor is meant to assess only. They aren't there to brainstorm solutions as to why something isn't working. And reviewers, I find, are very similar to submissions editors in that they're assessing, but not necessarily having to come up with a solution as to why something isn't working. Or likewise, they don't need to come up with a solution of how to fix it. And that's what editors do later on. And so we go through the assessment process. We go through the identification and the brainstorming and, possible solutions, and then coming up with a final solution. And sometimes the final solution is a Band-Aid, and sometimes it's like it's like the magic the magic ring, that it just works so perfectly. But we go through those various stages that someone who doesn't know how to edit doesn't go through those stages because they don't know what it entails to go through each.
Phil Leon says, I don't see it often now, but I really think it should be like in the past where the bubbles are roughed in with the preliminary art.
You know, a lot of self-publishers do sometimes put the balloons into the art just to get a rough idea of how much space they have. But I find that the more Marvel style there is, the less likely that is to happen. And the reason being is that the dialogue is created after the fact. So how do you put dialogue balloons and caption boxes and sound effects into art when you don't know what those things are going to be in advance? So having a baseline of what is going to be said, you know, and that's why, you know, some writers, when they're not writing full script, but when they're writing the plot format for the artist, will give basic ideas on what they predict will be the dialogue or the captions.
Yeah.
Just so that it not only does it help with the art, because it's giving the artist a little more direction, but it also helps them design the panels, what happens in the panels, to accommodate what could possibly be there.
Yeah, it's also something that I remember. I don't remember how you said it or whatever, but you also talked about open mouths and how open mouths obviously indicate speaking. And
yes,
how the fuck, like, if you're doing a Marvel style, how do you know whose mouth is supposed to open when you don't know what the dialogue's gonna be?
Yeah, I hate closed-mouthed characters if the dialogue does not have a sound that would result in a closed mouth anywhere in it. You know, for someone to say the word "no," you know, you don't have to have the shape of the O, but you can have the shape of the N. No, you know, the start of the word, not necessarily the end of the word. And the same thing when you have a full sentence. You don't have to go with the last word that is being spoken and what shape your mouth would be. But please, God, don't close the mouths of the characters. It makes it look like they have telepathy.
Yeah. Well, and the other side, I was actually working with this recently on a piece. I said, this guy's mouth's open and he's saying nothing.
Yeah.
He's got to be doing something. And he's like, well, it's not a big deal. I was like, it kind of is, because who just walks around going all day? Like, no one does that. He looks dumb. So I think you have to find some dialogue or something that will give us a good reason why his mouth is there and open.
Exactly. You know, and it comes down to purpose. You have to have a purpose for what you're including in your art, and that includes the shape of the mouth, the language of the facial expressions. You know, you have a character who in the dialogue is fearful, you know, or petrified even, and yet their facial expression does not, you know, express that in the least. And so, you know, one of the things that I get asked often is regarding the use of bold italics in dialogue, you know, and part of the reason that we use the bold italics is for nuance, you know, to create that nuance. And you see how you hear how my speech changed. There was certain words that were being focused on. Those are the ones that would be bold italicized. But you'll also know that you'll notice that my facial expression changed as well. Okay, you can have a dead-looking character who has no expression whatsoever, who's trying to speak with nuance. And part of the reason is that a lot of artists create dead-looking characters. The characters have no expression. So when a character has no expression, how do you convey that in the writing so that you're getting your point across as a storyteller. So the two don't often mesh. The art and the writing don't often mesh, and you have to try and find that middle point.
Sam's got a great comment here. He says, first off, I think we probably feel similarly on this subject, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say with this. How do you feel about splash pages as an editor? Are you fine with it?
I am fine with splash pages if they serve a purpose. And, for example, I had one creator who was using a splash page every scene. And so one scene's 3 pages, there's a splash page in those 3 pages. The next scene is 4 pages, the artist had a splash page in there. That's too many, okay? They have to have a purpose. The purpose of a splash page is to create a larger-than-life focus on a particular moment in time in the story, okay? Not only is, and it goes for every larger panel, okay? It just means that a larger panel conveys more importance in the story, okay? The smaller the panel, the less important it is. If they're a 9-panel grid, for example, each moment has equal value, okay? But the splash page itself is to help convey that moment in time and big time, okay? And the same thing with the double page splash. A lot of people are very tempted to go for a double page splash, but the payoff isn't, it's not worth it, It's like, it's thrown in there for the purpose of utility, not necessarily for a reason, Yeah. And so I'm fine with splash pages as long as they serve a purpose, okay? But they should be used sparingly, okay?
See, and look at this. Phil comes right in there. Yeah. Dead on, buddy. That's it, exactly. And so It was funny. And I'm interested to hear what your take on this. I was speaking with someone because I ended up saying to them, hey, I noticed something about your books. They all begin and end with splash pages. And he's like, yeah, it's a comic book. I said, sorry, what the fuck do you mean it's a comic book? What the fuck does that mean? Right? He was like, that's how they begin and end. I was like, the fuck they do? That's not true. Mm-hmm. That's boring storytelling. And he was like, no, man, all of my stuff does that. I had to tell them, like, that's not good. Like, I get doing it now and then, and there's nothing like, I've seen a lot which end with this beautiful splash page. You're just like, boom, drama, next issue. I get that. That's amazing. But every issue does not need to end like that. Just doesn't.
What it establishes in my mind is that this particular person has a pattern of their reading material. So it's not that they are noticing other stories that don't have splash pages beginning and ending their books. It's that they prefer books that start and end with a splash page. Because if you're only noticing that pattern, then it means that you have a preference for it.
That's actually really smart. Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Michael, thanks for coming out, man. Brian Manel says, by the way, guys, amazing questions tonight. I know that there's a bunch I'm hoping to get to all of them. You guys are doing fantastic. You make my job easy. So thank you guys. You're amazing. Right? Like, we're editors. Anytime anybody can make your job just a little simpler, thank you. What are some things you look for in determining if a panel count on a page works or needs to be split up?
Okay, so for example, I have a page that has 7 panels. One of the very first things that I'm going to look for is that moment in those 7 panels that can create a hook that will encourage a page turn. Okay, so if panel 4 is the best option for a hook that isn't going to encourage that page turn, I'll want to end on that panel. Okay. Sometimes it results in a page with only 4 panels. Sometimes, we can add other panels in there to create a longer pace in that page. But can you read the question again? I want to make sure that I get everything with it.
I'll leave it right up there for you.
So what are some of the things you look for in determining if a panel count on a page works or needs to be split up? I've seen a page recently that has 13 panels.
Ooh.
And yeah, it's way too many. Okay. With a page that has 13 panels, it doesn't allow certain panels to really live on the page. Okay. You have to have a degree of importance in the images that you're conveying. Okay. And if there's 13 panels on a page, that means that it's taking up a lot of real estate that 1 or 2 focus panels aren't. And so I'll usually divide those up into 2 pages and sometimes even 3 pages, depending on where those hooks are. I always look at the overall page count at the end. So if a person is creating a story that they want to stop at 24 pages, and there's a lot of instances like this where they have the 24 pages, but they have to add another page. Or there's a page in there that needs to be taken out because it doesn't serve a purpose to the story. Okay? I'll look for a scene that has a need for extra panels or where extra panels can be taken out. And I've noticed quite a bit that there are panels that you can have a series of actions of three panels that can actually be broken down into 2 instead, or where a larger panel can tell what all 3 panels are telling. So it's really a matter of understanding the pacing of the story, being aware of your page count, and seeing where a number of actions can be broken down or brought together, or even broken down even more. It's not a matter of filling up space most of the time. Let's put it this way. I for the last 7-8 years, I've taught a grade 5 class at my son's old elementary school about comics. And one of the things that we do is the students have to create a 4-page story that is a minimum of 20 panels, or I can say a total of 24 panels, because each page has a wide panel in it along with 4 square panels. Okay, and it is easier for a student to not create enough story than it is for them to create too much. It's very rare that they will overfill their panel count. Okay, most of the time they're looking for, what can I add in here that will fill up this space? Okay, the problem is too that as soon as you're trying to fill up space, you know that you're not serving the story, you're serving the space count. Okay, so your story always has to take precedence over your page count and your space count per page. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems to. Sarah says that's very interesting. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. I love to learn more and more. And yeah, Brian came in and said, or maybe more panels need to be added. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And sometimes they do, and really it's a matter of breaking down what actions are required on that page, and also noticing where your hooks are, where your turning points are for, or not a turning point, where your opportunities to hook the reader are, to encourage them to turn that page. There's a punch about to be hit, and you turn the page and bam, there's the punch. It's connected. Or there's a something that's said in the dialogue that acts as, I just found out who Sally is dating. Last panel.
Yeah.
Turn the page. So there's those opportunities where, as an editor, you need to be aware of them and figure out, can they exist on this page with other panels after it, or should it end on that page?
Well, and it's funny because I've had so many people say, well, then I feel like I have to force drama at the end of every other page. And I'm like, but it's not even about forcing drama. Sometimes it's simple as, even saying something like, oh, who's at the door? We don't know. I'm interested. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone ominous or anything. It could just be, oh, their neighbor's there. But it's still giving us that little hook of, yeah, who is at the door? I'm interested. So it's not about necessarily forcing drama. It's just accentuating those moments.
Yeah. It's creating a moment that is of particular interest, and you don't have to force it. If you force it, it's going to feel inorganic. Yep. Okay, it's going to feel forced. Okay, and your reader's going to react to that. So it's a matter of awareness more than anything else.
Yeah, it's funny because when we talk about pacing, a lot of times one of the things I tell people is, look, like, don't try to get too bogged down to it because it can be a difficult thing to think about. But just remember that at the end of the day, when it comes to pacing, we need to move forward. So anything you can do to push that forward, and anything we can do to keep from making someone have to go back. If you don't fully explain something, if your panel layouts don't fully make sense and I don't know where I'm supposed to look next, all those things that force me to reread a page, those are the same reasons for me to just close the book. And so we need to find those trouble spots and iron those out just so it keeps going forward. So sometimes pacing is just as simple as just do everything you can to make sure they don't stop reading and they want to keep going forward. And sometimes that's just the simple way. It reminds me of when I was learning how to cook. And there was a chef who was teaching me something, and he was starting to go over wine pairings. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know nothing about wine. He said, cool. He said, here's the easiest thing. If you use the wine in the dish, pair it with the dish. And I went, oh, okay. He goes, after that, you can learn nuances and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you use something in the dish, like a whiskey, a beer, anything like that, pair that with it. And I'm like, oh, so it's the same thing with editing. Just move us forward.
Yeah. I will say, I'll add this, that going back to the grade 5 example, it is easier for a writer to overwrite and pull back than it is for them to write not enough and fill it.
Yeah.
Okay. So allowing the story to be told and then pulling back what doesn't need to be said is a lot easier than ending it on page 19 and realizing you still have 5 pages to go.
Yeah. I saw a book where the first 3 pages were splashes, and I was like, this should have just been a 20-page book. Like you have that right and that use as an indie comic person. You can pick whatever page count you want. So don't push yourself into any, and hell, it means you're paying for less pages. You're paying me for, like, everything becomes a little bit cheaper. So sometimes if you have to make it shorter, you have to make it shorter, and it suits the story, and it is what it is. I'm sure you've had this before, but I had a young woman come to me. We were on a Discord. We were talking about writing and editing and all that kind of stuff. And she said, I have this 300-page graphic novel that I want to create with 100 pages. What do you say? And she said, so how should I go about that? And I said, let's not even get to the how. You're not there yet. Why? Yeah. Well, because that's what I want. I was like, but that's the least important element of your story. The
Yep.
number of pages and the number of characters, that shit doesn't matter. What matters is we have interesting characters within the number of pages that story makes sense in. She's like, oh my, yeah, you're trying to I don't know, to bucket list something, and that shit
Yeah.
just doesn't matter. That's not important. That's the least important stuff to worry about.
You know, I give the example of writers wanting to create the great American novel, but not having a story to fill it. And you know, so I think it's really important when writers are looking at a longer form story that they try and look at it as, how would it appear if this were periodicals or a mini series? You know, how many issues would this mini series be? And if they have a 300-page story, it becomes unmanageable, especially in an outline stage. You know, and yes, we're a little bit malleable with our outlines, okay? But your outlines need to make sense. And so how would that look as miniseries? Would this be 2 24-page books? Would it come across as 3 or 4 or 5? You know, 24 pages on a comic. I know Marvel and DC are 20 and 22 respectively, but a lot of, you know, independent creators prefer trying to go for that 24-page count. But if you're looking at a 240-page comic, that's a 10-issue miniseries. And do you think you have enough story if you were to break it down like that? You know? So always try and break it into the parts instead of seeing it as the whole like that, because that's where you're going to find your moments that after the first 24 pages, are your readers still going to be interested? Do I have what I need in those first 24 pages? You know, and when you're writing a graphic novel, you need to hook them right away, because they're dedicating not only their finances, but their time and attention to another 216, 224 pages, you know, of story if they've only read the first 24. You know, so you want to make sure that you have enough story, it's being told properly. Don't write the American novel, great American novel. Don't worry about that, you know. And the other thing that I always tell writers is start small. Start with an anthology story, you know. Get used to how story functions first, and format as well.
It was funny because someone was saying, you know, like, I want to write one of those big, huge books. And I said, do you know why those guys wrote those big, huge books? And I said, well, because they had a lot of story to tell. I said, nope, that's not why. Do you know why they wrote the big, huge books? And they said, okay, no, why? And I said, because they were paid by the word. That's why. And you're not paid by the word. So why don't you just tell a really good story, and the length doesn't matter near as much. Yeah. Because, in fact, they're getting paid by the word. You're paying by the word, effectively, or by the page. So do you really want to go 200 pages if you can go 150? Like, think about the savings there, folks, and think about how much tighter of a story you're going to have and all of that kind of stuff.
You know, and one of the things for myself that I do with as an editor is I also look at the marketing of it. So, for example, if I see that a book is 240 pages, I want to know what is in those 240 pages, okay? And I want to know who that audience is going to be. Because as soon as I know who the audience is, I also know how that audience reads. I know their purchasing, how they buy, okay? So, for example, guys around our age, okay, are used to the superhero books, you know, and they come out on a regular monthly basis, okay? But more and more readers are reading the collected volumes or original graphic novels because they want the entire story. So understanding who that readership is it helps you with your packaging. It helps you with your how you divide up your story or how you collect it, because you know who it is that it's targeted towards. And you know, that's why the young adult and middle school readers are so huge a market right now, because people are tailoring their stories to them. And sometimes you just got to tailor your story to your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm going through. Man, we have a. Oh wow, people are talking here. This is amazing. There's a lot going on. Kira had to go. Kira, thanks for coming out. We hope you check the rest of it out later on. So yeah, Douglas says my work is fairly text heavy, so putting text bubbles in is big for me. Yeah, and I've seen that with his work.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're trying to say. Always draw my mouth open. Yes, because I'm always talking. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll just in every panel. Yeah, Phil Leon says, to me, the Marvel method doesn't work very well if you're not in the same location in the bullpen with each other. I mean, it's certainly an advantage.
It's an advantage, but when you're looking at the fact that video conferencing and text messaging make communication so much easier, screen sharing is a lot easier. You don't have to be in the same location. You can walk through an entire story just on video conferencing, and the artist can be drawing everything out, or if they're working digitally, they can be doing everything on a screen share as you're walking through them with them. But there are very few writers right now. Dan Slott, I think, is he's one of the only ones that I'm aware of who uses the Marvel method now. Marvel in general does not use Marvel method.
Yeah,
they use script.
Matt Fraction did in that Hawkeye run that he won I believe they won the Eisner for, and
right.
I read about that, and that was really interesting because I remember someone basically he said someone talked about the Marvel method, and he immediately like seized up and he was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that ever," and then he stopped and went, "No, wait. If I'm scared of it, that's good. That's a challenge. I need to figure it out." And one of the things he realized right away is, first off, the Marvel method, you need to understand why you're using it. And I find a lot of writers use the Marvel method, and I'm sorry, guys, but I'm going to pin you to the wall on this one. It's because you're fucking lazy. And if that's your reason, give that shit up and write a full script. If you're going to write a Marvel method, I feel, and please, call me out if I'm wrong, Steve, but I feel like you need to have a really good, first off, rapport with your artist, but also that artist needs to be a really good storyteller.
Yep. You know, in all honesty, any writer who writes full script, depending on who they're working with and the relationship and the allowances and the belief that they have in the artist, they will write looser scripts, or they will write plot first and then dialogue after, you know. And just because you're a writer who usually writes full script doesn't mean that you only write full script. Okay, you're not married to the method, so you write however is going to work for you and your artist.
Yeah, so like in Belial, we're working on the third book now. And Greg and I have worked on multiple things. I've also edited things that Greg Warrenchek has drawn for. So we now have enough of a rapport that at any point he can say to me, "Hey, I feel like I need to add some panels here." Okay, go ahead. Like I trust him, and I've learned enough to just go, okay, yeah. If you feel like there's something, I don't want to necessarily have 7 or 8 panels on our page, but if you think that works and you have a way of, let's see it, let's go ahead and do that layout, and let's see what that looks like. So yeah. Sarah says taking screenshots of details and discussing each one is enriching, at least with my method of reading and reviewing. It can be.
Yep.
Douglas says body language is big. Do editors make suggestions on how characters should be leaning or alter their eyebrows?
You know, I'm the type of editor who will make those suggestions. I'm also the kind of editor who will tell the writers I work with to find online the expressions that they are looking for the artist to draw. For example, if I have a particular emotion that the artist or the writer wants to convey, and it's going to be somewhat hard for the artist to visualize it, then I'll say, look online, do a search for desperate images, and you'll find all of these images of people who are expressing desperation, okay, in a single look. You can also go to those photo, what do you call them? You can buy the photos, but most of the time,
stock photos.
Stock photos, yeah. Most of the time, it's just a matter of, if I want desperation and I have a female character who's expressing desperation, I will look up models of females expressing desperation, because the way they express it may be different in many ways than how a man would. So I would try and isolate that first and foremost. But there are so many ways of expressing desperation. So if I can find, as the writer, an image that expresses exactly what I want the artist to draw, that's going to make their job so much easier.
Yeah. I went to an artist once and told them to find that they needed to look up images of desperate people, and they came back to me with my grade 9 yearbook photo, and that was very humbling. That was difficult. I did that as you were drinking. That was a dick move on my part. See, editors can be funny too, people. All right? We're not just by the book pencil pushers. It's always good for us to have someone in the audience who's got our back. So, Justin Cole, thanks for showing up.
That's my son.
Steph Wilson is here. Yes, thank you for coming out. We really appreciate it. Steph says your job is easy. I'm not the one who draws circles on covers, mister. Okay? Mike Bankston's in the house. What's going on? She says, have I not heard Chuck swear in a significant amount of time? What dimension am I in? You know what? I mean, you can't force the fucks. They come on their own. And we're having a delightful conversation, so they just haven't shown up. But trust me, you get me in a rant, and it's they'll show up. Don't you worry. Yeah, better to need more than to have too much. Cheerleader, love it. Thank you, Justin. Seriously. Paul Gomez, thanks for coming back out, man. Establishing pages, splash pages, panel flow, page turns, after story. What would you tell a first-time writer to learn first?
Learn the language. Learn the language. Learn the format. There are so many different ways to write a script. Okay? There's no one single, just like there's no one medication for every illness in the world. You know, the fact is that what you need to do is understand the language of scripting, the language of the industry. Okay, so for example, if you're creating this panel where you have an establishing shot that is from a bird's eye view or a worm's eye view, you know, understanding what a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view is necessary. Okay, understanding what a particular angle is, For example, you have your front shot, your rear shot, your profile shot, and then you have like the 1/4 turn, 3/4 turn, you know, that kind of thing. When you're talking about distances, you know, distances, they range from extreme close-up, medium shot, you know, and medium shots actually divided into bust shot and, you know, from the abdomen up, you know, long shots, full shots, you know, extreme long shots. There's so much language that not only is some of its carryover from film and photography, but some of it is very specific to comics, you know. And so when you're talking about what's a good example? I like using things that are called match cuts. And match cuts are basically transitional tools that allow one scene to flow more smoothly into the next than a jagged, this is the end of this scene, then you go on to the next scene. Okay? It allows the story to just flow a lot easier. And, you know, some match cuts, there's mirror image, there's segues, there's so many different types of tools. When you're looking at cross-cutting, you know, that's also a film tool, but it's also great in comics. When you're looking at cross-cuttings, you're looking at different scenes that are all happening at the same time. There was this one page in I think it was Avengers #1 that was written by Kurt Busiek and drawn by George Perez. Now, George Perez is self-taught, but he created this cross-cutting of I think it was 21 different characters, all in different locations, but it was, this is happening in this location, this is happening in this location, this is happening here, you know? And so that technique, it's quick cuts, you know, that allow two things to happen simultaneously, two or more, you know? There's also split page. Split pages are what allows two stories to happen side by side at the same time. That's a comic book term, you know? So learn as much of the language as you possibly can. A lot of it is online, but there are a lot of reference books that you can find that will teach you that kind of stuff.
Do you have any reference books that you would throw out there real quick for some of our readers or our listeners to check out?
Oh, damn. My library is
Right?
quite extensive.
Well, Understanding Comics for me was a big one by Scott McCloud.
Yes.
And
DC put out a line of books, one for I think it's called the DC Comics Guide. Sorry.
No, you're okay.
So, for example, the DC Comics Guide to Writing Comics by Denny O'Neil. Let me get that in the shot, away from the camera. So there's one on writing for comics. There's one on penciling. Let's get it in the shot and away from the. So there's another one on coloring and inking.
Do this. There you go.
You know, coloring and lettering. There's a bunch of books written by. There's two books by Andy Schmidt, who actually is the person who he worked with Marvel and DC, but he is the person who started Comics Experience, which is courses that you can take taught by professionals. So yeah, there's so many panel discussions, and creating comics from start to finish are both more interview based, and so they have particular creators basically teaching for their particular chapters. There's a chapter on lettering, there's a chapter on inking, a chapter on penciling, so on and so forth. Stan Lee has some books that. So Stan Lee's How to Draw Comics, How to Write Comics. There's even one on a master class, Stan Lee's master class. So it's just a matter. What I do myself is we have a good secondhand store, here in Calgary. And I go there and I'm constantly looking for reference books or instructional books. And I just go through and see what I can find. Another good option is to go on Amazon and just select one title, and it'll usually give you a list of other books that you can find.
One of my favorites, I don't know if you mentioned or not, Words for Pictures by Brian Michael Bendis.
Brian Bendis, I have it in my library too. Yeah,
love that book.
Yeah. There are certain books that have information on editing as well. So some of them have interviews, like the Brian Bendis book has interviews with a variety of editors. And so it doesn't really talk about editing. It puts situations that editors would be put into. For example, material arriving late and professionalism and stuff like that. Certain topics that all these different editors can respond to. But yeah, there's so many out there. And actually, there, for the very first time, is a book on editing that's coming out.
I'm waiting for that one.
Oh yeah, me too.
Shelley Bond, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so Shelley is actually a former editor, well, executive editor at DC's Vertigo imprint, and she started at the beginning of Vertigo, and she took over for Karen Berger, and so she has written a book on, or is in the process of writing a book for editors only that readers can also appreciate. Shameless plug.
No, I know. I was gonna mention that too because I'm really excited about that book. It's funny. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I felt like I was at the top of this anthill, and so I feel like you get another peak, and now I'm excited to read her book so that I can go, oh, okay, no, now I'm looking to climb that mountain. I'm always excited to, all right, what's the next mountain of learning that I'm gonna climb? And actually, Michael Williams, he has a question for us. This was my most difficult thing to answer, and I don't think that there's one singular answer to it, but it was so tough, and I've had to work through that. What are some freelance editor rates? Yeah, man.
So there is no guideline as to what an editor can charge. Okay. However, there are some things that you need to consider when looking at how much an editor will charge versus what they're offering. Okay. First and foremost is some editors are very specific to the roles that they fulfill. For example, proofreading or copy editing or art direction or project management. Okay. Just because editor is the general title doesn't mean that that's what you're getting from a particular person. It just means that you need to understand that they are specialists or most comfortable dealing with certain things. For myself, after 30 years, I'm pretty well rounded. So when I'm looking at how much I'm charging, and I will not share how much I charge, because there are certain instances where those rates change. Okay, but if I'm charging for proofreading, okay, I have a low rate and a high rate. Okay, And it's only after I've seen a little bit of what I'm getting myself into that I'll decide, am I going to charge lower than that high rate? But I always give them the high rate first. Okay, and that way, this is the top that I will charge you for doing this. Okay, and if I find that it requires less work, I'll charge you less. Okay, and if they've already paid me a certain amount, then I'll say, okay, we'll reduce for the next payment, kind of thing. There's a stacking of skills. Okay, so kind of like the package deal. If I'm proofreading, if I'm copy editing, if I'm doing art direction, if I'm also helping with them understanding their market and how to best format their books, okay, that's a package deal, and I'll look at how much I'm charging per skill, and then I'll make a judgment call as to what the high end and low end will be of that. Okay. For example, if I'm charging $25 per page, that means that I'm charging $25 per page because I'm doing multiple things, not one. Okay. Yeah. The skill set and the experience of the editor. Sometimes it means a big thing, and sometimes it doesn't. I've known editors who have a lot of years behind them who can't edit worth beans. Okay, to make it more appropriate to the show, they can't edit worth shit.
Yeah.
And so, but at the same time, there are a lot of newer editors who just have that natural skill, who get it right off the bat. Okay, so the years that they have invested in the game, so to speak, doesn't necessarily establish the rate that they should charge. Some people, you know, they just have that skill, they're fantastic at it, and you know, they're worth that money. And I will say that for myself, I was working on one project where I came on after two other editors had done work on it. And the creator, after I started pointing out, because he hired me to do one thing, and then I kept asking, did you notice? Did you notice? Did you notice? And so he turned around and says, what the hell did they do? You know, if they missed that much, that I'm catching all of this stuff on a third pass, yeah, then you know that they weren't worth the money that that this person was putting into them. You know, so it's not unreasonable for you who are looking for an editor to ask for samples. Okay, and it's also very hard, and I'll say this with a lot of conviction, that editing is something that's hard to prove. Okay, and so unless you have a side-by-side example of what the before and the after looked like, it's very hard for me to show you what I did that made it better. Okay, and so when I am asked to show how I can make someone else's work better, I always have a side-by-side that I can give them that shows them this is what it looked like before, this is what it looked like after, and I let them be the judge whether or not they think it was worth it. You know, an editor can have so many positive reviews and testimonials and, you know, kudos, but it's also worthwhile understanding how that editor is going to work with you, not necessarily how they worked with these people. So it's a matter of the rates. It's a whole bunch of different factors that go into what rates are charged. But you need to know as a creator what you're getting into when you're looking for an editor, okay? And you need to ask the questions. Usually when somebody contacts me, I will always set up a a Zoom call or a video conference, because I like the face-to-face, and this way we can ask questions directly. I'm reading their facial expressions, body language, so on and so forth. It allows them time, but it allows me time to ask questions and learn as well. And use those opportunities to ask the questions to see if they actually know what they're doing. Okay? Because you can definitely get yourself into a situation where an editor isn't necessarily the best editor for you.
Yeah. I will say, as a warning to you creators out there, there is such a thing as an asshole text. And what you need to understand, guys, is that you know, how we conduct ourselves on our you know, on our social media and all that kind of stuff. You might think, I can be however I want and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you can be, but it will bite you in the ass. And I have seen people who are difficult to deal with, and so when they come to me and they go, man, I really want you as an editor, I think I could use the money, but I'm not excited to work with you. So, you know, you were talking about your ceiling. I might throw an extra $50 or whatever on top of that, because I'm going to have to deal with your punk ass, because I know that you're going to be frustrated to deal with. And if I have to come down, fine. But the ceiling's higher, so's the floor. Like, even if I do come down, it's not an awful lot. So, you know, how we conduct ourselves outside of this, it matters too. So, you know, understand that, because I mean, other editors, you know, the editors that you whose asses you're kissing to get into Marvel and DC and that kind of stuff, they're gonna pick up on that too. They're gonna probably look at your social media. They're gonna you know, ask around. Hey, do you know this person? You know, Michael Williams, is he a good dude? And you know, if he hasn't been, then you know they might hear about it. So you know, you have to remember that this is still a community, and you're going to want to watch your ass, because that those stuff are real. The asshole tax isn't a joke. I can tell you honestly, I've used it, and I know a lot of you. See Steve's nodding his head. It's a thing.
Yeah. My advantage after so many years of experience is that if I feel that I can't build a relationship with a client, I'll tell them that it's not going to work out, you know? Yeah. But I'm in that situation as well, and I'm confident in myself. There are certain editors, certain people who will take it because they take on a job because they feel that they need to take the job, you know, either financially or for whatever reason. They're feeling guilty because of a sob story that the person told, or whatever the case. But my radar is very attuned at this point to who I'm going to have a good working relationship with and who I'm not.
Yeah, and especially in the indie sphere, we know enough people who know other people, where it's just a quick, you know, hey man, I know that you've worked with this person. What are they like? So, you know, just that bedside manner we talked about earlier, editors having to have, you know, it kind of works on both sides of the fence. So you might want to kind of check yourself now and then and understand difficult to work with doesn't mean I won't work with you, but it does mean it may not be cheap.
And in addition to that is sometimes the relationship is on rocky ground, but this is where the therapy, because there was one comment about, you know,
John Westhoff,
sometimes that person is being difficult, but it's for a reason that is not associated with the story. And so having that background in counseling, I usually am able to have a conversation with them and try and pull out why they're being aggressive, why they're being hesitant, or why they're, you know, even giving in too fast. You know, because there's a lot of creators who just give in, and it's because they don't know how to put up that or how to stand the ground, you know. So part of that, the therapy or the counseling part of it, is trying to determine what is happening so that it will be a better relationship if I adapt to them and they adapt to me, and we come to an understanding of what the underlying problems are. Okay. You know, and it applies to stories being too personal. You know, sometimes stories are too personal because they can't separate themselves from it. Okay. But me telling somebody that their story is too personal without tact or without trying to understand why the story is personal for them, okay, isn't going to resolve anything. So, and if they find another editor, that other editor might end up having the same kind of problem, you know? So it just takes somebody to listen.
It's funny that you bring that up, because luckily I was close with this person. We were already friends before and respected one another before we got into this. But they had this very emotional, very personal piece that they were doing, and it was a big piece. And when they were working on the ending and the outline, they were just like, I think the general idea basically of this is that there's not always a light at the end of the tunnel. And I said, well, that's not actually a fair statement.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, why not? And I said, because you're not at the end of the tunnel yet, man. So you're just not at the light. And he was like, holy shit. And I said, yeah, so you're not seeing this from, you're still inside the tunnel trying to tell the story. You need to step back a little bit and look at it from a different standpoint. This isn't just your life anymore. This is the life of your characters. Look at it in that direction, and that's going to help you. And so, yeah, sometimes we have to do that. I like that. Yeah. Now, did you say beforehand, do you have are you supposed to talk with a client soon?
I was supposed to, but he's actually on a plane, and I don't know if he's available for his meeting. I can always reschedule with him too. So that's
okay. Well, you let me know how that goes. We still have a bunch of questions. We can go as long or as short as you want. So please, just at any point, feel like I've had enough, we can step away, because everyone seems really excited.
You know, I could go another 24 hours talking comics. So
we'll go a little longer and see what happens.
So, you know, my son is on the other side of the wall where the computer is, but he always has his air conditioner on, so he isn't going to hear anything. And my wife will have, you know, the fan going in the other room, so she won't hear anything.
Perfect. Okay, good. Then we'll go a little longer. Krista Hahn says, how do you handle double pages, more text or less?
Double page spreads? Is that what you mean?
I think that's what he meant. I'm not sure. Okay. Or even just because sometimes we have those double pages where the panels go all the way across. So I'm not really sure necessarily, but
you know, it comes down to the same type of idea as a splash, and it really depends on the purpose. For example, if I have a double page spread that is showing an establishing shot of a setting, okay, here's a good example. 9/11 is a great example of a double page spread that could be used where the focus is on the Twin Towers, okay? And so you're looking at the entire cityscape with the Twin Towers in the, you know,
smoke and
in the distance. So as long as it serves the purpose of the story, but first of all, I try and discourage double page spreads unless there's an absolute reason. I wrote a story where I used a double page spread. I start the first page with it starts off in the evening. There's a motel on the side of a dark road, a dark highway, and there's a car outside of one of the doors leading to one of the rooms. and the camera is far away. You can see the building, you can see the lights, you can see the road, you can see the car. 3 shots bring the camera in closer to the car. The last shot before the page turn has a focus on the handle on the car. You turn the page, double page spread, massive explosions, debris all over the place. Okay? So the idea there is to bring the attention in to where the reader is comfortable, and then you create this massive discomfort.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, a shot like that wouldn't use a lot of text. Obviously, you have the boom, okay? And sometimes you'll use that page for the story title page and credits, okay? Which is a good use for it. But generally speaking, a double page spread shouldn't be used. And if you are going to put a lot of dialogue, a lot of text, what I would suggest is breaking it down into panels. If you have a crowd scene, for example, at a Christmas party, and it's a double page spread, and you have dialogue happening in this quadrant, this quadrant, this quadrant, okay? You're better off just going a panel in this quadrant, a panel in this quadrant, and a panel there, okay? And there's actually a technique called the DeLuca effect, which shows one single action that is divided up into panels, but you can see how they all tie together, okay? But I would definitely focus it by putting this in a panel, this in a panel, this in a panel. The more text you put in a double page spread, the more reason it should be in individual panels.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So I don't know if that answers the question, but we'll find out.
Brian Manel says, yeah, I'm glad I went into comics with a background in video editing and production. That'd be helpful. Sorry, trying to go through all these, trying to find some good ones. Yeah, okay, so we're going back to the books. Michael Williams says Alan Moore has one, Andy Schmidt with Comic Experience, Brian Michael Bendis. Yeah.
You still there, Chuck?
Wow, I all of a sudden jumped out.
Well, I'm glad you're back.
That would have been, well, now what? Now, what do I do now?
This is where the song and dance, eh?
Well, I guess I'm gonna mosey. No DC's Guide to Editing Comics. Sadly, no. That the closest to that would be what Shelley Bond is gonna bring us, hopefully.
Yeah. And actually, I'm in the process right now of creating a series of small booklets for editing, because it's such a large topic and so much to learn. I'm setting it up as booklets so that they're smaller editions, and you can get one at a time, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because there's so much into editing lettering. For example, editing the font, editing the text, the word balloon shapes, the fill of the balloons, how they apply to particular characters, and so on and so forth. There's so much.
Where to put the tail?
Where to put the tail? Yeah.
What not to put the bubble on top of?
And there's something that I've seen recently and spoken to Aditya Bidikar, who's a professional letterer. He had done this technique in an issue of Swamp Thing, where a character is not in the shot, except for, I think, their hand or some part of their body. And so, no, I think it was pre-established that the character was off panel, but nothing is seen, but we know exactly where that character is. And so instead of putting a tail or instead of creating a free floating balloon without a tail, that would show that the person is there but not in the shot. Okay, he actually put a tail that was aimed off panel but was not cut off by the panel border. Okay, and so different techniques are used for different effects, but sometimes you have options. And in editing, I would want to know what those options are before I can make a decision as to what works, what doesn't, you know, what will be acceptable to the reader, you know.
Yeah. Sarah comes in and says, do you have your own YouTube channel for teaching these things? I'm absorbing everything you're saying. I feel you, hun.
I don't currently, but I've been told multiple times that I need to.
But going to the Comic Book Editors Alliance on Facebook is a really good way of getting a lot of that. And what's great is Steve is a super smart dude, and I've loved having him in my life and in my corner and all that kind of stuff. But with that group also comes all these other heavy hitters and even people that are new like us, who have really interesting points of views and great questions and all that. And it's a great place for you to ask questions of people and get, because again, editing, it's a broad thing, but it also can be very personal. We don't all see things the same way. There's certainly theories to it and whatnot. So that means that you're going to get a lot of different points of view, which means that you might end up finding the person who you most kind of identify with from an editing standpoint to kind of help with your stories.
Yeah, definitely.
Paul Gomez says, first book I was advised was Paneling by Will Eisner.
Okay.
Todd says, is there a campaign for Shelley's book? There was.
Yeah.
It's done. What's the name of it? Was it Filth and Grammar?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so the campaign, she's only printing off the number of books for people who pledged, at least for the time being. So you won't be able to buy the books in the bookshops or online until she gets this first run done, and then she'll decide what she's going to do.
But certainly, probably speaking to her, showing your interest and all that kind of stuff, it may even help you to be able to possibly purchase a digital copy, or at least show interest so she knows what her second print run would look like. So if that is something that interests you, and by the way, if you're interested in editing, even just to learn about it and to know to better yourself as someone who's going to work under an editor, this could be a really good book for you. So certainly, yeah, just get in touch with her and tell her, and you never know what that turns into.
Yeah, she is on Facebook.
Yeah, and she's very cool. Andrew Mecca Davis is in here. James Smithers is in here. See, we have more people. Yeah, you tell him, Rad Dad. What do we?
I knew that was a reason I wore this shirt.
I know, right? I love that shirt too. As soon as I saw it, I keep looking at that. Thanks, man. We're glad to be here. We're really glad to be talking to you. I love hanging out with this guy. One of my favorite stories of Steve was when I went to my first show and I did my setup. And first off, he talked to me. He was like, hey, man, can we talk through this setup? And he was great about having me rearrange things and kind of pull the focus to certain stuff, which is another thing that you're absolutely amazing at. But there was another thing. He spoke to me, either it was at the end of the day or I think it was at the end of the day. And he said, so how did today go? And I said, I made, it was a 3-day show. And I said, I made about 4 sales. And he said, well, that's great. That's really good. Congratulations. And I said, man, honestly, you don't need to fucking placate me. Like I have a fire under my own ass. I know that I can do better. So I'm just going to come at it stronger tomorrow. And that's where having a guy who's experienced is nice, because he then came to me and he said, no. You don't understand convention life. A lot of those people you probably sold to only had a Friday only, or probably had a Friday only badge. Most people who are there for the weekend, they're not buying shit on Friday because they want to assess and see what's worth it. And then they're going to come in, they're going to buy Saturday and Sunday. And that completely changed my viewpoint. And at that point, I could be a little less down on myself. And I remember you saying, if you sold anything on Friday, you're probably going to be good for the rest of the weekend. And he was absolutely right. It was exactly what I needed to hear. And it was something that I took with me all the way through, because a lot of the big shows I do that we do are, 3-4 day shows. So that was a massive thing to hear, and it helped me so much.
Yeah. People go there with a certain budget, and if you can get their attention right off the bat as they're passing by your table, that dollar's going towards you. It's not going towards another person. And likewise, it's not going towards snacks.
Yeah. Yeah. Make your impression while you can.
Exactly. And the thing is, too, when you have them at your table, sell them there. Don't wait for them to say, I'll come back later after I think about it, because they never do.
No, I had a guy, so at the last show I just did, Dallas Fan Expo, he came back on, I think, the Saturday morning, and he goes, I told you I'd be back. I had to tell him, I said, you're the one guy. You're the one guy. And he's, what do you mean? I said, we hear that all the time, and you just go, okay, well, I guess I lost that sale, and you just kind of move on and you go to the next one. But I said, you, my friend, are a fucking anomaly. So thank you. I appreciate you coming back. Michael Williams say, everyone, Paul has a campaign going on Kickstarter. Check out PTSD. Guys, put if any of you have any stuff that you want to show off and whatnot, I don't give a shit. Put it in the comments. Obviously we're here to talk about Steve and to learn and whatnot, but I have no problem with you guys sharing your campaigns in here. I know how tough it is. So if we can be of assistance, if our conversation can help you show off your thing a little bit, go ahead. I have no problem. Sarah, do you keep every financial exchange on record for tax purposes, or is it not important unless you make a significant amount of money? Also, would the records show up differently internationally?
Well, that I can't answer. I'm in Canada, and some of the clients that I deal with are Canadian. Others, for the most part, are American, and so the issuing of tax receipts and stuff like that is a little different in the States to Canada. So myself at this point, I don't earn enough editing that it makes a real difference.
No.
So I haven't gotten to the point where I've my expenses and my revenue are about the same.
Yeah, I feel you there.
Yeah.
I would say it's not a bad idea to keep track of the financial exchanges, just because then you have data as far as being able to look and see, and also you can look and you can go things like, oh, okay, I charged this much, and then these people never came back. Maybe I'm charging too much, or maybe it was, so all of that kind of stuff is data that you can use it at later dates and whatnot. So even just for that, it's a good thing to keep.
I definitely use invoices though.
Yeah.
So that's always a good tracking as well.
Which is why something like a PayPal or something where you can do the invoice right there on there, that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Brian Manel says, working relationship between editor and writer is absolutely key. I'm sure there are people I wouldn't be able to connect with out there, and that's okay. Yeah, it is okay.
You don't have to get along with everybody.
No. Outside of editing a story in a script, what's your process in editing a story within the art in its early pencil phases? Is that something you do as well in changing up panel compositions, or maybe taking out features in the art?
All the time. What appears in, I like editing visually. So if someone can provide me with layouts of what the planned page is going to look like. And if I also have the dialogue on the side that I can compare it to, then that helps me immensely. I deal quite often with layout stages, and I make corrections on almost every single page, no matter which client it is, because more often than not, they don't realize that iFlow won't work this way. Or, for example, editing a story earlier today, there was a scene in a hospital room where the patient is positioned a certain way, their bed is positioned a certain way in relation to the door, and then a scene change, a couple of scene changes later, we revisit that room, but suddenly the door is on the other side. And so I have to go and usually I'll do it visually in PowerPoint. I'll actually, crop and flip things around and stuff like that to give as much of an indication to the writer and the artist of how it can be fixed. I find just explaining in writing doesn't really do the job. So my specialty is actually the visual storytelling, is the sequentials. And reading a script I find very bland most of the time, because quite often the panel descriptions aren't detailed enough to give me an idea of what it is that they're planning. And so I'll have to correct all of that, and tell them, well, you've given too many details or not enough details, or you're being controlling or whatever. But definitely seeing the layouts helps.
Yeah. So it's funny. I've had a lot of people come to me with a finished book and then been like, hey, can you proof it, or can you help me with like some of the voice work and all that kind of stuff? And I have no problem with that. Sometimes what I'll do is, if I find something else in there, like art wise, I'll throw it in to help teach them, but also to show them that, hey, it might have helped to bring me on earlier in this project.
Yeah.
I remember one, and actually this is a pretty good example of that. There was one where the guy came to me, it was all done, and wanted me to just kind of go over the voice work and all that sort of stuff. And so they paid me for that. And I remember going over it, and there was a couple comments. So there was one, they had this shot of the Earth from space. And so I put a note on there and I said, what planet is that? And the guy said, that's Earth. And I said, the fuck it is. That looks like no continents I've ever seen before. And he was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And I was like, no, I said, people are going to look at that. And immediately what that screams to me is, you have a lazy artist, because they just kind of drew a bunch of masses. We all know what the fuck the planet looks like. If you're not giving something that looks like Africa, Europe, Australia, North America, like any of those things, then my immediate thought is, what planet am I looking at? Because in comics, we can be anywhere.
Yeah.
So that stuff's important. And then another time in the same book, we went from basically like there was 3 people at a table. We were behind the one person at the sort of head of the table with 2 people kind of at the other side. And then the camera just kind of cinched off to sort of beside them and onto an angle. And the behind the room looked completely different. And I was like, your artist has no idea what that room looks like. And that stuff is so important. And what was kind of nice about doing that was it meant that when that person came back for issue 2, they said, hey, I have a script. Can you please do the whole thing? And I said, yes, absolutely I can. And that was nice. I got to show them what I can do. And also it meant that now they have a better idea of what stuff to look for. So even if they hadn't hired me for that stuff, they could at least look and go, we need that.
Yep, exactly.
Doug Brown says, when it comes to content of this story as the editor, do you need to be aware of legal things like defamation or infringement? Also, do you have to be aware of things like, can you show a breast, or how much skin is too much for a teen audience?
first of all, I'll answer the second part first, which addresses, you know, the breasts and stuff like that. So I picked up a book recently, a DC young adult book called "I Am Not Starfire," I think it's called, and so in it, Starfire from the Teen Titans has a daughter who's a teenager, and a good portion of the story is basically her trying to create her own identity separate from her mother's, and her mother's, you know, this really sexy superhero, and everybody's familiar with her, and she doesn't have a place, you know, the daughter doesn't, and so the whole story is about the daughter finding her identity. As I'm reading it, I'm reading fuck this and fuck that, and you know, and it's for young adults. But it kind of shocked me that that content was in there, because I don't specialize in young adult material. So understanding how swears, how vulgarity comes into play with that. I know there are certain themes, for example, that I wouldn't want a young adult or a teen plus reader to read. But I think if it's directed to them and not a generality, for example, you'll have a book like Batman or Superman that is a teen plus book, you know, and there are certain things that they're allowed, you know, to show. But then they also have their 17 plus material, which does have the fuck this and fuck that, and you know, nudity, and
We get to see the bad dick.
the bat dick. I finally bought the bat dick book, you know.
It's a must own.
But really, it's a matter of understanding what, and you can do research on this. In general, you can look up online, like on Publishers Weekly and other sites, what is content that is acceptable for a young reader, for a middle school, for young adult readers. You know, what draws the line between a young adult reader and a mature reader. You know, so it's identifying those things and then figuring out, does the story really need it? You know, do I need nudity in the story for it to be a young adult material? You know,
Yeah.
how many fucks can I put into? You know, we're doing all the fucks right now because you know we didn't do them earlier on, so we're adding them on now. It's getting later. You know,
You're welcome.
But it's like watching a PG-13 or a 14A movie. You know, there's a certain amount of content that is acceptable for a particular age range or a starting age range, and it's the same thing with comics. Now, as for the legalities, where it comes to defamation, you know, plagiarism, copyright and trademark infringement, accuracy, historical accuracy, if you're conveying a story that is nonfiction, okay, how much truth do you need in a nonfiction book, for example? You know, those are things that most editors don't know, okay? But that's also one of the reasons that a lot of the books that are out have more than one editor, because one editor will be familiar with stuff that another editor won't be, okay? And the same thing with skill sets. Like I was saying earlier, that, you know, some editors don't know how to spell, are terrible at grammar, but there's a second editor that they'll bring in who will, you know, kind of do that and support it. So part of being an editor is questioning everything, okay? Is having your spider sense going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week kind of thing, you know, where if in doubt, ask the question, get the right answer, you know. And when it comes to something like plagiarism, for example, even though I might not be familiar with something that appears in a Shakespeare play, okay, that might be acceptable to use, and a piece of dialogue or a piece of a song that's within the last 10 years where you can't use lyrics, beyond a certain point. It's a matter of doing the research if there's the slightest hint of a question that it's not legal or whatever. But not everybody can do it.
Yep. Sarah came on. She had to leave, so she's bookmarked this, and she asked me some questions. So I will send you the editing page and all that kind of stuff. So no problem. Paul Gomez says, "Great show, both of you. I feel like it was a treasure trove of knowledge." You're very, very welcome. Where else? Love the convention sales tips. I'm gearing up for my first show since January 2019. Honestly, this guy has been such a huge help for me. As far as go ahead.
One of the other things that I do is I teach. I teach trade show vendors how to not only design their tables, but also how to present themselves, what knowledge they need to be aware of as a salesperson, as a person comes to the table, how to avoid being searching for words. I teach that kind of stuff too. So with Chuck, for example, at his first show, one of the things that I did was I saw that his display was very small, and he was right next to somebody else who their display was kind of encroaching on his. And so I said, well, the first thing you need to do is turn in both ends of your table, the stuff that's on both ends of the table, so you're creating your own space. And I said, create the area where there's nothing blocking you who are going to be speaking directly to these people. If you have more than one person behind the table, make sure each person behind the table has their own space that's unencumbered by these towers of product, that kind of stuff. Color is a huge thing, your tablecloth in relation to the product that you have. If your product has a lot of detail to it, then you put a simple tablecloth of one color. I've seen tables that have, these huge patterns, and because their books or their product has patterns on it, all of it blends together. It doesn't stand out. So yeah, a whole bunch of tips like that. I teach that stuff too.
Yeah, and he's been a huge help with that. We're almost at the end. I can see the end of the questions. I'm so excited. My butt's starting to hurt, but this has been amazing. I think I'm going to answer the. What's that?
I have a cushion on my chair. It's about
That's
that.
Smart. I have a cushion too, and it's flat now. I have to switch out my cushion and let it breathe. Brian Manel says, for panel descriptions, how much detail is too much for the artist? What are things that an artist tends to look for the most? For me personally, I think I try to run this kind of invisible line of, I want to give them enough stuff for them to then take it to the next level. So I want to inspire the artist. So I feel about putting it now, but it depends, because you might have an artist who simply isn't that imaginative and needs you to hold their hands. And I've seen that. So it's almost kind of like feeling out the artist. Personally, anyways, that's sort of my take on it. But so knowing a little bit about the artist and how that works helps. But I try to find that fine line between giving them just enough to then inspire them to draw something way better than I would have thought of.
Yeah. I will say that artists who ask for more details are the ones who probably are trying to get 2 or 3 or 4 jobs done in a month. because the more an artist needs to visualize for themselves the story, the more time it's taking. That time that it's taking is taking away from any potential other income that they get. Okay, so all of it comes down to the preference of the artist. Okay, for example, somebody like Mark Wade will write a certain amount of detail and specific direction, camera angles and stuff like that for one artist, but another artist, he'll give like a couple of words and let the artist just do their thing because, the artist wants to be involved in that regards. So there is no specific amount that is perfect for everybody. What it is as long as you're getting the information across to the artist as to what they need to draw the panel and get your vision. For example, someone like Alan Moore, there's a bit of a joke with Alan Moore. One of his editors wrote recently that a story that would take 30 pages of script for your average writer, a 24-page story would take maybe 24 to 30 pages of script, where Alan Moore would write 150 pages of script, but it was all brilliant. There's a couple of samples that you can find online of Alan Moore writing for The Killing Joke and for certain pages of Watchmen. And the amount of detail that he puts in is a mixture of detail for the artist and also a conversation that he's having with the artist. So it's almost like they're in the same room and he's relaying all this conversation along with the detail. And when Dave Gibbons was drawing Watchmen, there's actually pages online that you can find where Dave Gibbons just highlighted the details that was in this mountain of text, and it's all in caps. It's all in capital letters, the entire thing in panel description. And so it takes so long for an artist to read through all of that it's taking time away from their art. So realize that. Okay, that's a huge thing. So give them the amount of detail that they need and also what they ask for. Build that relationship. I've worked with writers, with artists myself as a writer, and some of them want me to direct the camera, to tell them what size panel I'm looking at. If I'm looking for a wide shot that extends across the page, or if I'm looking for a tall shot because I have a character who's being pushed down into the depths of the ocean, so I have this tall thin panel. Some artists are going to want that kind of detail. Others are going to want to use their imaginations. Speak to your artist and find out for yourselves. I will say that there are certain ways of writing a script that I find works for most artists, and that's you always start off with setting the scene, and then you establish the characters, and then after that you convey what the action is, what's happening. Okay, and by categorizing it like that, it makes it easier for the artist.
Yeah. Brian then comes in and says, how do you tell if a character is speaking like the character and not the writer?
Well, part of it comes about with identifying a pattern of speech that the writer is establishing. And here's a good example. In writing Animal Man, Grant Morrison had his personal agenda in talking about what was it? animals and animal cruelty and SPCA and save the animals kind of thing. So he was able to convey what his message was, but in Buddy Baker's words. Okay, and sometimes it's very easy for a writer to lose track of who their character is and where their dialogue begins, okay, as a writer. And I notice it especially because when I'm having a conversation with the creator, with the writer, it'll be on a Zoom call, a video conference, and I'm hearing how they're speaking, and I'm listening to the tonality and the nuances and stuff, and even their phrasing. And so when I capture that in the story, and it sounds different than the character does, then I know that the writer's getting a little bit too heavy into their own language and way of speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Michael Williams says, thanks. Check out my podcast, Comics and Pop-Tarts. Get a free comic when you sign up. I will do my very best. I like to be very forthright and upfront. I'm a writer and an editor. And I bet you that Steve hopefully has my back on this one. And that is, it can be hard to watch and check out a lot of these podcasts and whatnot, because it's not like we can have it on in the background. When I'm editing, I need to be paying attention. When I'm writing, I need to be paying attention on that. And the one thing I will say, artists have such, they bear so much of the weight of what we do in comics. But I will say the nice one advantage to them is that a lot of times they can have things going on in the background and still work. And that's not an advantage that I have at all. And I'm sure there's people who can do that. So I will do all I can promise is I will do my very best to check it out and to give it some love and to let you know what I think. But feel free to if you think that there's something that you guys are talking about that I'd be interested in, feel free to send me a link or whatever now and then. I don't need to see every one of your episodes. But yeah, feel free to do that. I would absolutely love that and check it out. Dude, we're at the end of the questions. That was the last of them. Is there anything else before we kind of sign off? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? You felt like you didn't get to, or anything you want to add?
Not that I can think of at the time being after 2.5 hours.
Right? Yeah, see, even Brian, who's been here, I think I'm tapped out. I feel you, buddy. It's nice because there's kind of a catharsis. We got so much information out there. We really got to teach, and that's why I love chatting with you and certainly having you on, because by the end, we're all brain exhausted. We're just, okay, cool. That was great. Might have to watch this one again.
This is something that's playing in the background.
Yeah, right. You certainly could do that. Can you real quick, well, not even real quick, but can you tell everyone kind of where to find you and sort of give everybody the idea of Steve and what you get when you work with him?
Oh my Lord.
Well, at least just, hey, my name's Steve. You can find me here, and these are the general services I offer.
Most of the time, you can access me via email at editors.view@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook. Just look for this pretty face here, and you'll be able to distinguish me from the rest of the Steve Coles or whatever. But most of my time, if I'm not editing, is on the Comic Book Editors Alliance Facebook page. So I encourage you to come and visit. It is open to the public to view, but you have to ask for membership, send a membership request. And there are 3 questions that I obligate you to answer. in order to understand what your motivations are and what your background is to actually get in. I've refused so many people. As to what you can expect from me, well, other than what you've seen in this past 2.5 hours. So my background, I'm 30 years in the industry. I have comic retail experience dating back from 1987 to 93. So I worked in a comic shop. That's how I started out. I have publishing experience, marketing experience. I'm a teacher of all this stuff. I teach other editors as well. You know, I'm an art director. I'm a consultant to publishers and other creators. So you basically get the full meal deal.
Yeah. I will tell you guys, if you like what I do, a lot of it was affected by this man. He taught me and really brought me under his wing kind of early on in my career, so to speak, and really kind of honed the rough edges and pointed me in the directions that allowed me to be better at what I am. So I want to thank you personally, Steve. I really do appreciate everything you've done, and it was so good having you on, man.
Finally.
Yeah, I know, right? All right. You know what? It's so funny. I have so many people jumping at the show, and I want to help so many of them out that I often forget I'm allowed to ask people to come on. I'm allowed to kind of say, "Hey, I love your point." So at one point you said, "Hey, I'd love to be on." I was like, "Great, I want you on. Let's do that right now. let's figure that out." So thank you for that. See, once again, you were teaching me. You gave me a good reminder. Hey, you're allowed, and I've had that little kick in the pants a couple times. Hey, yeah, you're trying to do good work for other people, but remember that there's also an audience and there's what they want too. So you need to find that. So we'll be doing more of that. Next week, we're going to have Edward Davis from Immortal Era here. He's going to talk about writing in his books and all that kind of stuff. Steve, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate you being here tonight.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure was very much mine as well. Guys, 2 hours, 36 minutes down. That was insane. Thank you guys so much. Who was counting? The ticker there was counting, and I saw it go the whole time. But you know what? It jumped. So there's so many people in here. I can't even show them all, but there's a bunch of people who absolutely love you, Steve, and we're so happy that you came on here, and I think we're all the better for it. So thank you, guys. My name is Chuck, and I give a fuck. Take care and stay safe.
Take care.